View from the Gutters, episode 150. Welcome to View from the Gutters, the comic book podcast where each episode we discuss a collected edition, trade paperback, or graphic novel, and then recommend and vote on the book for the next episode. Warning, the discussion portion of this show has massive spoilers for that book. On this episode, we discuss Top 10 by Alan Moore, Gene Ha, and Zander Cannon. Thank you to all of our Patreon sponsors for contributing to the show. And a special thank you to this week's episode sponsor, Brian May. Welcome to View from the Gutters, episode 150. I'm Tobiah Panshin.
I'm Deforge.
I'm Kayleigh Fleeman.
Brant Gillihan-Eddy.
And I'm Cade Reynolds.
And welcome to our sesquicentennial episode.
Is that what it's called?
That's a word?
How many times was that practiced is the real question. Standing
Actually,
before a mirror.
I gotta be honest. Tobiah probably didn't need to practice it much because of everybody in the room. He's the most likely to have actually spoken that word before.
But I choose to believe that he stood in front of his mirror with like some sort of dramatic music playing in the background and just like muttered it and then walked out the fucking door. Like verbal explosion.
I have an insult that I'm like waiting to use.
Oh, please.
I'm not going to use it because I really want to just drop it on somebody, hopefully some point tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But it is
right now.
But it is a word that like with my lisp and everything is very hard for me to say. And I have practiced saying it like 30 times at varying volumes while Kit is not home.
How dare you?
Well, I don't want you to think I'm calling you that.
I don't like this game.
I love this game.
So instead...
Well, I did want to start out our episode very briefly, just saying thank you to all of our listeners who have stuck with this nonsense for 150 episodes.
Thank you.
Or less. I don't know. Maybe this
Yeah.
is your first one, in which case
Hi,
you are welcome for nothing.
It is always this bad. Just
shit.
strap in.
Yeah.
But for those of you who have stuck it out through all of the nonsense and all of the Joe Preddy rants, thanks for being here.
They fast forward through those.
We
I know I do.
appreciate We really do.
Yeah.
It's,
If
You
you
fast
had
forward
asked
through like
all of
30
the,
whole minutes.
all of the feedback that we've gotten over the years from people who have had their love of comics rekindled through listening to this show or
those were
learned
always the
about
best
comics for the first
emails.
time.
Mm-hmm.
It is really heartening and it makes it worthwhile to do this show. So thank you, everybody.
I am
Yeah.
particularly appreciative of Tony Asaro,
Yay.
who always says nice things about Kit and I.
Tony,
And it just makes me feel really great.
anytime you want to say something nice about me, feel free.
Just go for it. I won't stop you.
I mean, I go home and I'm going to print that shit out and tape it to the mirror and be like, you're a firework, Deforge. Yeah, all the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so on that note, let's talk some shit about some comics.
So, excuse me as I cough off to the side. Since Joe's not here and I'm finally back.
Yes, Joe once
Yay.
again dumped a Alan Moore book on us for a divisible of 50 episode and then is not fucking
Chose
here.
to not show up. No, to be fair, he's dealing with family emergency
true.
type
Yeah.
issues. He's not like off gallivanting, cackling in a corner somewhere, rubbing his hands together in a...
Yes, our
sure there's time.
thoughts and well wishes are for the Prettys. Prettys everywhere.
Yeah.
This is a call out to all the pretties everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we're talking about top 10, Alan Moore, Gene Ha, which for those folks who didn't have a chance to read the book is kind of an interesting hybrid between a slice of life comic in a world, in a city with full of superheroes, and extraordinary beings.
Well, it's a police procedural.
Yeah. So that's
It's
what I was going to say.
NYPD Blue
Right.
in a world filled where everybody
Has something going on.
is a science hero.
Right.
whatever the hell a science hero is.
It's Alan Moore's crotchety way of saying superhero, but not having to actually give in to that, which is one of the things I want to discuss about this book. Full disclosure, top 10 is actually my favorite Alan Moore book, of which there are a few, but that has a lot to do more with the man than the material.
Which is actually something
you're talking about
an
idea which never dies.
Yeah,
really.
But it was published through America's Best Comics in the I was right. In September 1999 through 2001 was the original run. Then there were a couple of offshoots, including a second series that was done. So there was an offshoot for one of the main characters done by Alan Moore again with an artist named Zander Cannon. And Zander Cannon actually wrote the second series himself, working with, I think, his brother.
And was that the 49ers?
No, that was actually season 2 of Top 10. I'm not sure. I can't remember off the top of my head who did the 49ers, if that was Moore himself or if Cannon did that himself. So,
all right.
But I thought Moore had involvement in Top 10, 49ers, and Smack, but then it was after that he didn't really have involvement.
Right, and I think it's because he kind of passed the torch to Zander Cannon because Moore was done, but he trusted Cannon enough.
And then when I was looking this up, apparently there was even a newer one that didn't have Cannon or Moore on it. And that was really weird.
Yeah, that would be interesting because I know that Moore likes to keep a pretty tight leash on his works at this point after getting burned by DC so many times.
Yeah, some irony, maybe not irony, I don't know, but that, of course, this was a sub-imprint of Wildstorm Comics, which would then come to be purchased by DC Comics, so I wonder how that probably shakes out for Moore. I'm sure he said something about it.
I would be very surprised if he didn't have something in the contract that he signed.
Oh, sure. I'm sure
licensing this, that he owns everything.
Yeah, I'm sure he's probably got a much tighter grip on it than he used to, but... So yeah, it's kind of an interesting book. It's got a lot of different things going on, yet still kind of retains this very, superhero-laden, powers type.
Yeah, when I thought about it, I got a vibe that it was like Gotham Central meets Powers meets Transmetropolitan, kind of.
I felt Transmet too, actually. I was hoping someone else would feel that.
Yeah. Well, it's got that same kind of background attention to details, just filling out a world through walking through it.
Like the pop songs and all.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like the media saturation
posters,
of the world feels
like if you're like reading the posters as you go along, they actually explain stuff that later comes up in the book. And so it's like you've got storms and you're like, holy shit, I know what that is because I read the posters on the wall about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, whether he appreciates it or not, I think this is another title, much like, Watchmen and others that Moore worked on that kind of heralded, a lot of people have taken what this book did, and the ideas it was trying to tap into. It wasn't only Moore who was working with this, but I think, you look at where all of the big two where the big two publishers are now, plus a lot of the series that have come out in the intervening 15 years. And I think that, this was one of the first books on the horizon that was like, let's talk about what powers would like do in a real society, quote unquote. How would they affect people? What would people's real lives work? Kind of stepping away from the more fantastical elements of this notion of folks with superpowers and saying, well, how would they be realistically in a sense? And then also that aspect of world building, right? Because there's lots of books we've talked about from the last 10 years or so that have done the same kind of world building, right? Rucka and Lazarus, I now all of a sudden my brain is blanking, but I think that, Moore has always been kind of a pioneer in that, flavor and back matter and having little things inserted and articles and stuff that I think a lot of folks have really grabbed onto to kind of flesh out their narrative in a way that just the panels can't do.
I know that's definitely the case. Like my first time reading League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, like how much of that was important to my reading of the book. Like I think that's what made it the most enjoyable for me, which otherwise some things story-wise I was like, I don't really know. But it gave it, like you said, way more of a flavor and a personality to latch onto.
I almost feel that this is more going back to his deconstruction of superheroes that he started in Watchmen and kind of redoing it 10 years later. kind of looking at
I see this
aspects.
This feels like a very different work than Watchmen.
Oh, no, totally a different work, but kind of just like working at what makes what makes the superhero worlds tick.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because Alan Moore, I think, feels like he destroyed superheroes in a sense, and yet he keeps going back to them.
Right.
And trying to kind of dig up this nostalgic golden age or pre-golden age sense of superheroes. Yet, I don't know, there's something that's just deeply, deeply cynical about Alan Moore that can't quite gel with the optimism and the idealism of superheroes, and like he can't quite contextualize them, and so he's just driven to scratch at them and scratch at them and scratch at them.
Well, that's what's so interesting to me about the second major arc in this story, right, features kind of one of the original golden age teams of this city kind of falling from grace and, being less than their perfect ideal self.
Well, not just less than their perfect ideal selves, a bunch of pedophilic scam artists who created a legacy for themselves that never existed.
Right. So, it's interesting because I think he does, outside of this text, Moore does wax nostalgic about superherodom, or alternatively smacks it down as though anybody who enjoys it and is an adult is somehow not engaged in high art. Right, which is some of the commentary he's spewed out in the last 4 or 5 years with the rise of things like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Is basically like, if I wanted to be a 12-year-old, I could go, read a bunch of different things. And it's like, dude, you don't get me wrong, you wrote some important stuff, but Tom Strong and this book are not exactly like the upper crust of whatever. Like, recognize that there's something that you obviously feel like there's something to be had there. So yeah, I agree with you. There's the second arc. He's kind of tearing down this notion of golden age nostalgia and what have you. But one of the ways he does it is also by showing that like these cops, these superpowered cops with all their foibles and flaws, basically succeed and keep the world ticking through their inherent humanity, quote unquote, or decency, despite all of the weird trials and tribulations. So yeah, I get very mixed messages from Alan Moore sometimes as far as what he says in public versus what he's put to page versus the difference in his works. And I mean, I guess that in some ways is indicative of that he is good at his work, right? Like he can create very different flavors and very different tones. But it certainly is fascinating to read this book. I read it when it was first coming out. It was kind of during my reintroduction to comics in college, and then now to read it some number of years later again, I'm left still kind of confused by the man who made it. And like, why would you say some of the things that you made if this is how you felt? Not that he can't distance himself from his own work years later, but because there does seem to me that part of the thing that makes Top 10 one of the most appealing Moore books to me is that I find that he is wordy to a flaw. The pages are jam-packed with dialogue, and one of the problems with the world building that he does is it's kind of old school. And Gene Ha is also kind of old school, although he's kind of on the cusp of being part of another wave of artists. So there's still a lot of traditional panel work. There's still a lot of lines. The coloring is a little more advanced than some of the stuff you saw in the 80s and the 90s, but it's still kind of not quite where we are now, which is kind of the golden age of coloring, quite frankly. So yeah, there's lots of text and lots of noise on the page. And but there's a lot of heart. Right? Like there's great humor, like some really great character moments and dialogue and some tragedy and all these things. And so clearly there was passion there, or at least a very good facsimile of passion in creating the work.
Yeah. Oh no, go ahead, Kit.
No, I was thinking, I was kind of thinking a little bit about what Cade was saying in regard to returning, I guess, to the whole Watchmen thing. And I think your statement, Brant, actually helps my thought process on that while I was mulling that around. Is I think that any writer or any creative person worth their salt is pretty good at, first off, making a statement, and secondly, contradicting themselves. Because if they're any good at being creative, if they're any good at what they make, they can use that as an individual to re-examine their positions from before.
Sure.
And in respect to starting with Watchmen and continuing some of the ideas in this book, I think that makes a lot of sense for Moore, who frequently does contradict himself because he's using his own medium to explore his ideology about these things.
Sure.
And in some respects, I also feel a little bit like Top 10 is actually a lot more about police than it's about superheroes, in the sense that it talks about how individual conflicts can get in the way of doing your job a certain way and how you overcome your sense of self for a greater good. So whereas Watchmen is pretty clearly superhero-like, I feel like he's kind of taking another little step to the side to say, well, this is even more human.
Right.
I guess this is even more a human problem than,
in a world where everyone
Watchmen.
is special, no one is special kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. You know,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
think
all the
that's
characters in this book, even the non-humans, are very human, and that's one of the attractions to this book for me, is that even though it's like set in a world kind of like the transmetropolitan world, you can become more attached to the characters than you could in that book. Like, I mean, I bawl my eyes out every time I read the ending of issue 8, 9, when Sung
9 or 10, when Girl 1 gets killed.
Yes. I bawl my eyes out every time. And,
throw that spoiler right out.
Oh, yeah.
I know. I was trying to say the
up.
end of issue 8, 9 and just leave it at that. But like, you know, like right away her replacement comes on and I'm attached to that character. Like from the second scene he's in, I'm like, okay, I love this dude.
Which is actually funny. I was talking to my brother Adam about this. He comes in and he's immediately like making friends and cracking jokes and being a great guy. He's being incredibly manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately goes off the book.
He is a robot.
Talks a guy into killing himself, breaks all the rules, and is basically doing everything in his power to get everyone to like him with no regard for how he's doing it.
Well, social ingratiation is textbook for robots. That's kind of like, I don't know, like when, again, this whole thing is like the whole point of a lot of these robot characters is that they're meant to serve a human society in a human sort of way, that social ingratiation and manipulation is necessary.
They try to be human to a fault where they're, you know, no longer the robots that the cold logical robots that they originally were created to be.
I thought it was interesting too, because when we first see Smax take on Robin as his partner in the very beginning of issue 1, he is a very cold character. He's very like, don't fucking talk to me, don't eat with me, I want nothing to do with you, like you're replacing my partner and I don't want that. And he comes off as kind of like an asshole.
Total cop trope.
Yeah. And you're just like, wow, fuck this guy. Like, he's got some stick up his ass. He's an uninteresting trope of a character. And it's later that you see him kind of warm up. And it's like, you know, he does have a colder exterior and a harder exterior, but he is a character that has wants, needs, fears.
Yeah.
He feels real.
And you learn to love him. I mean, especially with the scene of him sitting there with all of them and they're just giving him never-ending shit and he's just taking it.
Right.
Like,
but Irma, on the other hand, who was Girl 1's partner, she opens up as instantly very warm, very welcoming character. You instantly like her because she's just cool mom robot person. Like, she's awesome as a character. But when Joe Pye becomes her partner, she is very cold to him, very don't talk to me, like you're replacing her. And it suddenly contextualizes so much of how Smax was in the beginning that you're like, oh, it would be even harder for him as a colder person to try to warm up this rookie. And it's clearly difficult for Irma too. Like, this is kind of a natural process of accepting your new partner. And I thought that was really cool because of the parallels and the differences between the characters when you compare them side by side.
Yeah. Well, for all his flaws, Alan Moore is a name to conjure with because he is an incredibly good storyteller. He's very, very good at adding in all of these layered, nuanced characters and kind of filling you in on them one bit at a time and kind of showing you through their actions things that you see a character do a thing and you think one thing about them, and then you see them do something else and it recontextualizes what you thought you knew about them.
Mm-hmm. Because they're multi-layered.
Yeah. I did kind of want to go back to what Brant was saying about Moore a little bit earlier. I was talking to Adam about this, and we were looking up the various ages of different British or comics writers from the UK, because a number of them are Scottish. Warren Ellis, who gets thrown in with Alan Moore a lot, was born in 1968. Neil Gaiman and Grant Morrison were both born in 1960. Alan Moore was born in 1953. And I think that it's significant kind of understanding the way that he thinks about characters and the way that he structures his world. The fact that he's that much older than a lot of people who are seen as his contemporaries, who were part of that British invasion of the 80s, that he grew up through kind of the worst time in Britain after World War II, when everything was broken and everybody was poor and everything was being kind of ground into the dirt. Because there is that kind of cynicism to him, and it comes out in his characters a lot. Like, everybody's got their kind of weird perversions and hang-ups. Like, everybody's got some secret thing where they're just a dick or a weirdo or whatever. The cop who's just racist all the time. Mm-hmm. Everybody's got some issue that they're dealing with, and I think that really comes out of how Moore must have grown up and the environment that he was in as a kid. Because we were talking about how he seems to have a hard time believing in optimism and idealism, and I think that there's something that's there, and this is kind of a revelation that I've had about his writing that's got me really thinking about what he's done and the evolution of his comics. And I think it's really colored my read through of Top 10 this time through, kind of keeping that in mind and looking at the way that he's structuring his characters and he's structuring his stories.
This kind of post-war common good mindset, I think that is important to acknowledge that, where optimism of that type, I guess, always kind of like optimism that comes on the heels of something horrible. I feel like it's kind of inevitable to meet it with some degree of cynicism, especially after going through all those things when you're young. And when you have that in your periphery, I think, as a writer too, that would, I think most of his work kind of comes across in that way. Pretty much across the board, it's this idea that if you have to cooperate for common good and everything else, it doesn't necessarily negate your individualism. And even more so in societies where you had to be extra cooperative, those types of individual perversions and mindsets kind of tend to grow like mold in the dark, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's something that he's always been I've always found him particularly interesting for that respect, where I think it's easy to turn to him and be like, oh, he puts all these gross things in to be edgy and everything else. But I think there's a realism in that, and a realism that comes from experience. And that's worth acknowledging.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And talking about Irma and Girl One and Joe Pye, it's this kind of idea of like this terrible shit happens and you pick yourself up and you dust yourself off and you move on. Yeah. And you do the work.
Well, and that's a very cop-like way of looking at things too. I mean, that's how they're trained.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I found that was really refreshing about this was that when issue 1 starts, you look at it and you go, oh, this is a story about Robin, about Toy Box. She's going to be the main character, and that's that. And like she kind of gets the first case that they get. It's like, oh, this is going to be a series about this murder. Like this whole series is going to focus on that. And then by issue 2, it just kind of splits. Like we're following this group now as they're on this murder. We're following this group as they're chasing this pervert. They're following this group now as they're following this serial killer. There's a domestic abuse charge down here, so this is where we're gonna go. And it flows. Everything flows, which I think is really hard to do when you break up a story in that way. But it felt good. That's the best word I can come up right now. It felt good to read it because it gave every character a chance to be in the spotlight. Like I really felt like I knew a lot about the characters. And every character I think had some moment where you got to really see their true nature. And I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I think for the most part, every character in the book goes through a bad moment, but then also has a really great moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely a really great character piece in that dimension. I did kind of have a problem with some of the characters, or at least some of the depictions of the characters. Talking about Girl 1, just her design seems weird to me.
That I feel was directly challenging a lot of superhero costumes because they are basically just naked women.
Image Comics at the time that this was put out, I mean, this was by one of the Image companies.
So you think that was kind of an intentional shot across the bow of Image and what they've been doing?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it wasn't only Image that was doing that.
Well, yeah, no, it wasn't only Image, but
not.
like when we think about 90s Image Comics, that's the first thing that pops to our mind is like
maybe your mind.
I
think of the fantastic storytelling.
Yeah. Great stories that were
over-sexualized women and bodies that really can't bend that way.
Well, I mean, the fact that she is literally designed by a couple of little goblinish dudes to be this like sexy superhero that trots around with no clothes on.
Yeah, what episode was that where Kit and I got into sexual versus sexualized?
Oh, jeez.
Catwoman? No,
Catwoman.
It wasn't Catwoman.
No, it was before that. I was here for that one.
Oh, it was Black Canary and Zatanna.
Yeah.
Yes. There we are.
So I think the context matters because she's the only character who's like that. Because one of the things I do think is really appealing, I have some challenges with Gene Ha's artwork personally, and maybe not even his artwork specifically, but the coloring and inking around it. But she's the only one of a great. There's women, there's men, there's things that are neither women. Well, there's human women and men, and then there are other animals and other creatures, and variety of body types, a variety of designs, when people were talking about when Cade made the comment that everybody got like their moment to shine or had a bad moment, I was thinking of the scene with, is it P.I. Joe, the robot, the new one?
Joe Pye.
And then the dude with the antennas and the flame powers.
You mean the electricity powers?
Yeah.
The racist guy, I don't remember his name.
Yeah.
Officer Peter Cheney.
Yeah. No.
Yes.
With the little skulls on the thing and the orange outfit.
The guy that the cop
who's partnered with the cowboy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Peter Cheney.
Oh, for some reason I thought he had another.
I mean, he does, but it's like electrolyte.
But he's like reaching into the. He's talking crap to the robot, and then he's reaching into the vending machine, and the robot's like, "You're already like." Doing something with a person. Oh my God, cousin Cecilia, you need to cover up and not.
The hillbilly cousin.
Yeah, my hillbilly cousin. But I was just that is one of the things that is impressive about this book is that it feels authentic in that. Yeah, some cops are old, some cops are dogs in exoskeletal suits, some cops are pudgy, some are round figured, big figured, tall, naked, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so coming back to Girl 1, it's like, that in of itself, you're kind of like, that's a little strange. But then it's like, it doesn't feel as overtly like, we're drooling over this character because...
I kind of feel like it's something that is not contextualized the same way now as when it first happened.
Yeah. My biggest thing on why it is definitely tongue-in-cheek versus just like, haha, I can put a sexy woman in here, is which I'm sure is exactly what Jean has like, is when she is doing the handstand for the kids, for Irma's kids, like as a trick of like, oh, check this out. Her boobs hang in an unattractive way, the way a woman's unrestrained boobs would hang if she was doing a handstand. And it's like, oh, he actually knows what female bodies do.
Boob physics.
Yeah, boob physics, which, laugh if you will, that's a huge thing in comics. Nobody gets the boob physics right.
No, it's
not nobody, but not many.
Very, very, very few. And usually when they do,
video games as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's usually they're always round and they're always perky, and somehow they're always facing up.
That's everybody else. That's an auxiliary superpower. You know how when the X-Men everybody got a secondary trait?
Yeah.
All women in the comic book universe.
That makes sense.
It's their secondary, tertiary trait.
Also completely unimportant, but you kept saying some cop this, some cop that, and I had to strong that because no two cops are not on fire. There we are. I'm done. Thank you. It was in my mind and in my heart. And
Thank you for that drive-by strong batting.
Hey, you're welcome.
Yes, everybody's looking at me like I had more
I'm looking at you because you're talking about boobs.
Boobs are very important.
You have our attention, Kayleigh. You have the floor.
Yes. But no, Sung Lee, girl one, as a character, it's kind of like this joke of, oh well, I'm just more comfortable this way, you know, like it's just like I just color my skin a certain way so it looks like I'm wearing clothes. And I think a lot is to be said for the joke in there that she realizes that Kelmo is colorblind and thus would not be able to see her change her costume, and therefore she is always naked to him, like varying shades of gray basically. And she gets really pissed about that. It's just like, oh my god, that's disgusting. And yet the idea that she is completely content of like very clearly being naked with just colored skin versus like it being shades of gray and that suddenly being different. Like I thought that was really funny, and I thought that kind of pointed as evidence that it was tongue-in-cheek
by the sapphire junk of Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah.
There you are.
Yeah.
There's a precedent for this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, did we want to actually talk more about Jean Ha's art? Because this book falls kind of firmly in that period where digital coloring was starting to become a thing. And unfortunately, like I think that this book is kind of subject to the rule of thumb that everything colored between about 1999 and 2004 looks just kind of weird and overly gradient-y.
Too digital.
I don't know. Did anybody else have a problem with that, or was it just me?
Looks like ones and zeros.
I mean, the comic looked very smudgy to me.
I guess,
and
I did notice a difference reading it digitally as opposed to a physical copy. I noticed that the physical copy is a lot more bright, but maybe that's just maybe they have retouched it in the later printings. I'm really not sure.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I think my favorite thing about the art is the designs of the vehicles. Particularly Smax's car. It's a tricycle. It's only got one wheel in the back, and then it's got like that awesome Pontiac hood with like spikes sticking out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, that thing gets to me. If I had infinite monies, I would build that car.
The Smaxmobile.
Yeah.
Yep.
Probably be illegal to register it in most states, but I'd still build it.
I'm looking at the art and the coloring right now, and the coloring doesn't really bother me. It's definitely of its time.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I can't really look at it because you have my iPad.
Well, and you're not getting it back ever. So there you go. Mm-hmm. No, I think that the coloring is fine for me. The biggest thing I had a problem with in his art, specifically in, I think it's issue 8, the issue I'm on, but I don't, 5. Issue 5, when they're fighting the tentacly beast thing.
Yes, the giant vagina monster.
Yeah, that thing. He does really weird things with necks. And I don't know if anybody else noticed that. But characters, especially anybody that was supposed to be like kind of gangly, I guess, their necks bend at angles that they should not bend at. And that is not intentional because they are definitely human creatures.
Yeah.
And that really bothered me. And it's kind of like,
well, I'm looking at that issue you're talking about, and like in some of these scenes, Jackie has like a brachiosaurus neck.
Yeah, no, yeah, he just kind of elongates their neck or shortens their neck to kind of fulfill their desired height.
And looking at it like, da-na-na, na-na.
It's really great. Like, look at this the bottom panel here.
Hell no, you look at it.
With Peter Cheney. Yeah, their necks do weird things. So I think he definitely strayed off model for a couple of things. But other than that, like, the art it's solid, right? It's a part of the story. I feel like it's part of the story. I think sometimes when we discuss art, we as a group tend to kind of like, oh, well, it failed the story.
This is good or this is bad.
Yeah, well, specifically, it failed the story, it aided the story, without realizing, well, it is the story. Like, the art is the story, and that's that. And I think in this case, it definitely feels to be part of this world. I feel like there were no shortcomings. There was nothing that wasn't a part of this world. There are definitely flaws in the art. Things like the necks going off model. Also, Smack seemed to change height depending on when it suited him.
I'm pretty sure that is his superpower.
Yeah, I think that is actually related to his power.
It might be, but sure.
It could very well have just been a thing.
Yeah. But yeah, so other than that, other than like changing body shapes for characters that may or may not have had that as powers, the art works. It does its job. It tells the story.
I for one find it somewhat par for the course that if I'm reading an Alan Moore book, it's going to be more about him showcasing his writing than showcasing art in a comic. Mm-hmm. The one exception I ever find when I pick up a book that's written by Alan Moore that I know I'm going to enjoy both is anytime I have Kevin O'Neill and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, because it's something I can enjoy on like both levels. Sometimes I kind of wonder how Moore gets on with his collaborators, or like how he kind of picks who he picks.
Yeah.
Because honestly, like, it's always a struggle for me to want to read an Alan Moore book as an artist, because I just find 90% of his work outside of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, comic-wise, an eyesore. Whether it be through the insane amounts of text that he puts in everything, which that's honestly, like, I'm not usually there to give too much of a fuck about the writer. I'm more there to give a fuck about the artist, and that's my personal bias as an artist.
Yeah.
And I think that there are just as many people out there that are like, well, the writing, because they're writers, you know, and or at least that's just the way their brains are oriented. And for me, like, I had to be honest, when I did not go woohoo when I took my first look at this book, I was like, oh, okay, this is a thing I'll be doing, you know, but at least he has fun with ideas, and that's something I get on with. I just don't think that there's that much of a prioritization of art in most of his work.
Right, which I think is something
Gibbons, I guess, too.
I think that's kind of something that is more of this modern age of comics, right? Like, I will bring up my favorite comic, Umbral, right? Umbral, the art is very clearly a part of the story, and is obvious and intentional that the art and the writing mesh so well that it becomes the story. I think you get that sort of level of collaboration through decades, where writers originally were kind of like, well, I'm telling a story, and writing is above all else. Art, as long as it looks good, it works.
The vessel for which it's told, and not part of it.
Here's a push.
I think there's a cycle there. I mean, the rise of image was 90% artists who had basically managed to convince the majority of the comics market that they were the priority over the writer, right?
Yeah.
And that was the big war between Marvel and DC for a long time. Read a DC book, look at a Marvel book. Like, Marvel had Jim Lee, had Todd McFarlane, and even before then, you had Walt Simonson and some of those other guys, who their art was spectacular. I mean, even Gibbons on Watchmen was considered, to have made revolutionary steps in how he even put things together. Mm-hmm. I think that for me, what I see with Moore is that whether it's wholly a choice of his scripting or if it just happens to be who he collaborates with, they didn't have the presence of mind to try some of the things that other artists now do that probably would have served their stories well.
Right.
Or he, I have this book that is probably one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen, and I love it to death because it's such an interesting insight into the way these kinds of comics in general get made. It's comic script writers on comic script writing, and it's 8 or 9 different essays.
I think it's 12,
or it might be 12 from different artists. So Kurt Busiek, Mark Waid, Todd McFarlane, I think Ellis is in there.
Yeah, and I think Garth Ennis is in there.
Garth Ennis and a few more. And they basically all show how they script a book. And what's really interesting is that you've got someone like Busiek who has some art history, or has some history with doing art, and also I think worked at Marvel for long enough when they used to actually have the scripters bust out panels. So you have some writers who are literally saying, I want panels laid out like this. I want to see these specific things. I am the director of a film.
Bendis does that a lot.
Right. And this is what I want to see. And then you've got folks like, I think Ellis is one of them, who's just kind of like, I say, put in these things, give me places to put words.
And if you read...
I don't care. I want you to do whatever you're going to do.
Yeah, Frank Miller's script for, I think it was The Dark Knight Returns, in the back of the trade, he's got the script in there. And many of the panels, it's just like, I want this, do whatever else you want.
Right.
And then this is what they say. This next panel, do what you want.
I'd be curious to see what Moore's scripts look like, whether or not he does a lot of screen direction.
Yeah, it also depends on what artist they're working with. Because I've seen lots of writers comment, like, when I'm working with this person, I can just go, and on this page, do a fight scene.
Right.
And that's it. That's all they have to say, because they know that the artist is going to go to town on it.
And especially
and with other people, they have to go like, okay, here's the panel breakdown. This is how I want the fight to go.
Especially when the artist is not just working on it, but a co-collaborator.
Absolutely.
Like on The Dark Knight Returns.
Dark Knight Returns, Miller was the penciler. So, I mean, as far as making a lot of those decisions, it would kind of be
maybe it wasn't Dark Knight
Returns.
Was it Year One?
Yeah, maybe
maybe Year One is what we're grooving on.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't know. There's lots of places in this, just like when I reread Watchmen, where the one thing I'm kind of like, is that the panel work is not inspired. And it's 20 years old. I can't expect that to an extent. The one thing I realized, and I beat this drum all the time about limited series, is it is Gene Ha's art. It is Moore's scripting. Inkers change. Yeah. And so you go from issue 5 to issue 8, and the inking is way more rough than it was 3 issues earlier. And even with the same color, which I think the colorists actually do change at some point. I think it's like it does. It changes just enough where it's like if I was watching a movie and then all of a sudden the third act got some sort of weird, all of a sudden looked like a Quentin Tarantino movie. Yeah. If I switch from Michael Bay to Quentin Tarantino, where it's like now you're looking at it through 75mm grainy 70s texture, I'm like, what?
Yeah.
It changes, and I think that's the one thing that
the Santa issue looked a lot different than all of the
others. Yeah.
And I think that's the one thing that the comics medium struggles with from a production viewpoint, which is that those things do impact how people absorb. My father constantly rails against a lot of new books because he does not like modern comic art. He likes the stuff that was produced in the 70s and the 80s, that kind of more less intense, less what he calls cartoony, although I'm like, that's all drawn like a cartoon.
Everything's a cartoon.
That's a very vague definition, Dad. But so I think that can have, this was my problem with Wicked and Divine. I'm not a big fan of that art. And it makes me like,
Whenever I think of Bronze Age art, I think of George Perez and Dan Jurgens.
Yeah.
Because they both draw in a style that is very reminiscent of that look to me.
What's interesting about Jurgens, though, in particular, short aside, is that his style has evolved quite a bit.
It has.
It's got a bedrock to it that's very consistent, but he's cleaned up a lot of his stuff for modern sensibilities. I've been very impressed with that. Slide aside.
Kayleigh, I see you, see me, seeing you. What are you?
So I will. This is it's a different topic, so I want to make sure that Brant got to finish what he was saying before I interjected. And I appreciated the things that you had to say, but
nice
he mentioned,
mouth words.
Yeah, like those mouth words.
You about to Kanye me?
I'm gonna let you finish. But Kit,
yes.
So I read the Santa issue, and the entire time I was like, God, I need to watch Kit read this issue.
We could go do that.
Because did you notice the little skeleton child?
I've never noticed a skeleton in anything. I don't
Definitely
take time
not.
to
The
point
little
out
skeleton child with the bow in her hair, who would raise her skeleton hand with all the other children.
Do you want to know a gross fact? I almost texted you about that when I was looking at it, and then I was like, nah, she's had enough of that at home. He's popping in the door skeletons, Kayleigh,
I almost
skeletons.
texted you about it, but I didn't want to spoil it if you hadn't read it yet.
You can always spoil skeleton spoilers. Okay. Are always acceptable.
But because I know you really like absurd and cartoony and Lobo the Mask, all that.
Yeah, that's my shit.
So I was kind of curious on how you felt about the Santa issue, because I really enjoyed it as haha, this is crazy. This is what would happen in this crazy world. But
yeah, honestly, that was probably the thing I found most enjoyable, having to do this whole thing. To be honest, I don't know. One of really the only times that I was like, I'm enjoying what I'm reading with my eyes, and I'm kind of okay with the situation that I'm currently in. And yeah, basically my only thought about that entire thing was just skeleton. So I don't have anything meaningful to say. I'm sorry.
Okay. For me, Kate let me down. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You would never let me down.
I wouldn't.
Anyway, I really enjoyed the Santa issue because it was just Alan Moore having fun writing something.
Yeah.
And he cut something I've been having an issue with, which I'll get into later, but has been pretentiousness surrounding a lot of these older writers.
Yes, my God.
And Alan Moore, while one of my favorite authors, definitely suffers from this. And the Santa issue, and for me, most of this comic, honestly, was fairly free of that. But the Santa issue in particular was he's just enjoying himself. He is just writing something to enjoy writing it. And I loved it. Because of that issue, I want to own a copy of this book.
Yeah, that's what I was alluding to in the beginning, was this is one of the few books by Moore where I'm not feeling like I'm being beat over the head. We're this is the obscure text that I'm pulling this character from, or this thing, or this concept from. Do you see how important?
Yeah. Do you see what a wizard I am?
And it's and it comes from I struggle because my wife's best friend, and who's a very good friend of mine, she's kind of more of a writer in this, of the ilk that I think Moore is, right, where these are people who are steeped in the language of literature, and part of that exploration for them is really, is Beckett and, Camus, and really getting into the language and understanding how it works, and regurgitating it, and Ulysses, and the great works and the obscure authors, and you're but I'm much more of a that's cool. I really don't give a shit that you managed to put a guy with a cherry on his hat from some weird thing in the background of a thing. I much more deal with the more your ability to do that does not necessarily make or break a deep emotive story for me.
I don't find you impressive as a person when you insist on finding something that other people will struggle to understand for the express purpose of showing everyone else you understand it.
Right.
So when references or whatever things came in to this book, that's one praise that I do have, is that some of the little background stuff, the the phone booth clothing store or something like that. The things like that should be accessible enough to where people can enjoy them. Otherwise, you're just jacking off.
Yeah,
jack off on your own time and privacy of your own home.
Well, there's definitely something to be said, and comics in particular, I think, are ripe for this, of interjecting references to things that you like, kind of hoping that somebody will get them. It's when you're upset then that your reader doesn't get it.
Right, I think that's the big thing.
Or holding it over someone's head.
Or having it kind of as like as something that is deeply relevant to the plot, but explaining it away as, oh, it's in this one obscure text. If you don't get this plot from here on out, you're an idiot because you haven't read this text. Mm-hmm. And that is something I have a really big problem with. And this book was fairly devoid of that. I think it would have been easy to interject things like, oh, well, here's this, sci-fi work, here's this literature work, here's this, here's that. And he didn't really do that. It was kind of more in the background of like, I hope somebody catches this. And I really enjoyed this book for that.
Well, that was really League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, where there are entire books written where it's just like, okay, on this page, here are the 30 different stories he's referencing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And it can be fun on some level to pick up a book of any type and sort of not know what somebody's talking about, because it can be a gateway to reading about, learning about other things that then fascinate you. That can be a really good thing too. Yeah. But I like a lot of referential stuff to just kind of be like, hey, it's sort of there and it's passing.
Sometimes it is fun to delve into that stuff, though. We've talked previously about the Dark Tower.
Yeah, and Browning, I was thinking about that too, is that if you haven't read Browning, you don't necessarily lose the entire book, though. That's the thing. Mm-hmm. You don't lose the ability to enjoy the book by not having read Childe Roland, Dark Tower Came. It is not required, but the homework later can make it kind of fun once your interest has been piqued.
I think I'm going to just say one thing real quick. I think books like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen are kind of separate from that, because the whole idea is these are references. These are things that happened in literature, and this is a book about that. And so in that case, it's like, sure, yeah, that makes sense. It's when it's like, this is a book about cops that police superheroes, and they are superheroes themselves, and this is a whole city of superheroes, and you're like, that's neat, I want to read that. And it's like, and here is a literature reference, and you're an idiot if you don't get it, and you are a Philistine if you don't want to.
There's a 14th century cop poem that I'm going to bring up right here, talking about a cop on the beat.
Yeah, I think that's what the dividing line is for me. Have you guys ever read or heard of Finnegan's Wake?
Mm-mm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I know Toby has, because he and I had to read it together, or at least parts of it. So it's this book by James Joyce. It's written in this incredibly obscure mishmash of like Irish slang and shorthand and all this stuff. And it's, deep and ponderous and meaningful. And it's actually one of my wife's favorite books. And the book that's sitting right next to it on my mantle is this book called The Skeleton Key to Finnegan's Wake by mythologist Joseph Campbell, where basically all he does is basically say, here's everything that's on this page. Here's everything that's going on. Here's everything on this page. Here's everything that's going on. I think you can make as many Finnegan's Wake as you want. The instant I have a problem, in this case, somebody like Alan Moore, is showing up and shitting on everybody who liked anything else that you ever made, and basically being like, because you don't necessarily get this, or because because you never moved past it, or because it's the attitude around it.
Yeah. A punishment.
Yeah. Or just like this weird, like, elitism. Like, sometimes, I get it. You're not drawing, you're not making art like a Renaissance masterpiece. It's going to take me to, I'm going to have to deal with my emotions and my feelings. And sometimes you just threw paint on a fucking wall, and I don't care. Mm-hmm. We can agree to disagree. I'm not a lesser human being. I'm not missing anything or lacking in intellect or, whatever. And I think that's the thing I've always got to grind with Moore, is I feel like he's kind of sitting on his porch talking about all the damn kids on his lawn.
I think it's a cave, actually.
Well, yeah.
Well, it also goes back to the thought that how good of a writer are you if people can't enjoy your work without having to jump outside of it all of the time? Like, I think that you can definitely enjoy something in the context of an artist's vision, but it is not your job as an artist or a writer to tell other people what they should feel or what they should get out of your work. You might want to, that thought isn't erased, but you don't necessarily get that opportunity, and you shouldn't expect to. Yeah. Like it, I don't know, if you pick up and do homework on other things and get extra color, or maybe see those splashes in a different light, that can be a good thing. But you do have to wonder what the thing in front of you is saying to you right now.
Oh yeah.
So like you're talking about Finnegan's Wake, and I was thinking about Clockwork Orange in that sense, where it's like, it's really interesting how you can have this book that messes with and creates a slang and a language of its own type that becomes coherent just through the act of reading the book. That after a certain point in time, your brain doesn't have to struggle to parse the language or grok the meaning of this dude. It just sort of happens once you're immersed enough. And the good thing with that is that you know then that the person is a good enough writer to have kept your interest long enough to foster that understanding too. Mm-hmm.
Although on the flip side of that, I think some folks do need to test. I mean, I think that this is where I get cautious, is that I think folks do need to test themselves, right? Like,
yeah,
I think folks do need to sometimes, and I run into this even with comics all the time. Like, people are being like, what's a good comic to read? And I think about which ones are good or bad to give to folks. Calling back to a number of episodes ago now, Avengers Forever is one of my, it's probably one of my seminal superhero books, but man, you want to talk about tons of inside references. Luckily, depending on which edition you get, it catalogs them all. But it's
the Earth
still,
X trilogy as well.
Yeah, the Earth X trilogy. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that shit is just fucking layered with obscure references.
And I think, and that was the spirit in which it was created, is that those creators really wanted to celebrate it. They wanted folks to dive into it. And I think sometimes
they wanted to reward the people who did
absolutely. And I think folks
it.
need to, and then they also...
Marvel's is one like that as well. Yeah. Like, if you really know a lot of the Marvel history, you will catch things in that book that a lot of people will not.
Yeah.
Right. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think that while there's something to be said for artists being legitimately upset when somebody takes something that they created and bastardizes that, I think there are limits to the degree to which you can say, other people have taken the things that I created and built on those, and I don't like it, and I hate you all for liking it, Alan Moore. I think at a certain point you have to say, I made this thing, and now you all get to deal with it, and you can appreciate it on the level that you want to appreciate it on.
First off, you meant Frank Miller.
Oh, excuse me.
I'm going to say correctively because I'm going to swivel 45 degrees to my friend Kayleigh here. We were sitting on the couch not too long ago, about maybe 2 weeks ago or something. And it came up that we had a pretty hearty discussion about Frank Miller and Daredevil.
Yes.
In this exact sense, is at what point are you justified in your anger about people using things that you did to define a character and doing it in their own kind of light? Mm-hmm. And I was kind of on the position of, look, I totally get how much that would kind of suck and hurt when you know that you worked on this kind of thing and that this was your baby and this was important to you. But, Kayleigh's saying, there is a point, though, that if you were formative in this thing, you got to acknowledge where people are going to take that ball and run with it. It's not your game. Yeah. It's like you didn't invent the game. You're just a player in it.
Yeah, and the example that we were talking about, because it was... this conversation was difficult for two reasons. One, it was late, and we both get cranky after a certain hour, and then insist on staying up.
Would that hour be the witching hour?
Yes.
Once that's gone, you're just done.
Past 3 a.m., we're done. Mm-hmm. No, another reason is I'm personally not a big fan of Frank Miller as a person. I find him irritating. Is that justified? I don't know. I don't care. He annoys me. But specifically, Elektra has been cast for the new Daredevil second season. And he comes out of the woodwork and goes, "That's not my Elektra." And I was just instantly super annoyed. I was like, nobody cares. Sit down. Shut up. Like,
it's not your character.
Yeah, it's not yours. It's not yours anymore. And I think, we were talking about it was hard for us to kind of get onto the same level until she brought up like the idea of Kayleigh Sue DeConnick. If Carol Danvers was to be cast, and Kayleigh Sue said, "That's not my Carol Danvers."
Would you get mad at her the way you would Miller?
Yeah, Miller. And I had to think about it, and ultimately my answer was yes. If the casting decision made sense, she was not flawless on the Captain Marvel run. And there are definitely things that could be done with that character that could be done better. Could be done worse. Whatever. But if the casting decision made sense and she came out and was like, "Nope, that's not mine," you just have to tell her, and it's not yours anymore. Like, it's...
There's a saying that my dad likes to repeat: no story tells all. Like, you created your story, but you can't then declare these characters are dead. They're set in stone. No one else can use them. This is all that they ever are or will be. Like, there are always going to be more stories to tell. And people are frequently going to use characters that they're familiar with, that they like, that they feel are relevant to the story that they want to convey. And if that doesn't 100% line up with what one author did with them, then that's too fucking bad.
And if they're not allowed to, they just change one syllable of the name and they're good.
Yeah. I mean, just look at Mark Waid's Irredeemable.
What you're not appreciating here is that Frank Miller is a big fan of Jennifer Garner, and that's why he's so upset. Is because he's looking at this new lady and he's just like, not my Elektra. Not who in my heart of hearts was meant to represent this character.
Yeah. He does have his little shrine, as I understand it, the Garner shrine built into the side of his house.
I mean, that makes his anger much more justified.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Damn you, Ben Affleck.
And on that note, are we done with top 10? Have we said all that needs to be said? Does anybody else have anything they'd like to address specifically about the book?
I think I'm good.
I think I'm good. No, I'm not good. I have another thing I want to say.
All right.
You're not okay.
I'm not okay. I'm really not okay.
Okay.
I'm not okay. I'm not fucking okay.
All right.
All right. Anyway.
About what is your not okayness?
Actually, I am okay. I'm sorry. I just had to drop My Chemical Romance into there.
Okay.
No, I really enjoyed this book, all things and quibbles aside. I have not enjoyed Alan Moore for a couple of months now. It's just been kind of like things that like of his like I'll open and just be like, ugh, no, and just kind of put it back into its dark hole and be done with it. The exception to that being Swamp Thing, which I will always love.
Actually, my brother said the same thing.
Yeah, makes sense. There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
But no, this made me really love Alan Moore again, or at least some aspects of him.
What year did the League come out? It was before this, right?
Yes.
Okay.
First one. Yeah.
Because I kind of feel like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was the last thing by Moore that I really loved. And that starting with this was when he kind of got into his fossilized downward spiral of cranky old manness. For me, at least.
I want to sum up my thoughts with an impassioned plea. If you're doing graphic design, for the love of Glycon the Snake God, do not fucking put gradients in your logos. Don't fucking do it. It's the quickest way to date your shit. It's the quickest way for me to look at your book and say, I'm not going to enjoy this shit, and to immediately approach something with a shitty attitude because I hate your design ethic.
Same time. It came out at the same time.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I will also throw out a comment, I believe from Gene Ha, which is if you're going to design a character that you're going to draw a lot, don't give him like 1,000,000 peacock feathers.
Oh, yeah.
Like you can actually notice, and I did notice this reading through this again, he draws Lord Peacock?
King Peacock.
King Peacock. He draws King Peacock almost exclusively from the front.
Mm-hmm.
He is always facing the camera,
yeah.
except like twice.
Yeah.
Because after the first time, he was like, oh my God, this is so much work. I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
That's fan art OC law number 1, actually, is limit your peacock feathers and your spiky anime hair and your foxtails.
Yes.
Yeah, by just a little bit.
Nobody needs 9 fucking tails.
Excuse me.
Inuyasha.
Actually important, though. Relevant to mythology. He does need them.
Yeah.
Yeah. 9-tailed fox.
I know.
Okay.
I understand that.
Yes.
It is a pain in the ass to try to draw or costume.
Mm-hmm.
It's bullshit.
It's true.
So what you're
So
saying
up
is
your
that
game
I
is what I'm
shouldn't
saying.
write a crossover fanfic between Naruto, Pokemon, and Inuyasha and ask you to draw all of the characters that all have 9 foxtails.
Pokaruto. Fucking kill myself.
I don't draw.
Pokeyashiruto.
I would just look over at Kit while I was writing it and go, Kit.
It'll be on the fridge in crayon by morning. Just wait.
All right. So as has been traditional with our long run episodes, I guess we're going to sort of wrap up with if you liked top 10, what else should you read? And we're going to start with Cade for no reason in particular, except that I know that he had something that he wanted to pitch.
You sure you're not a 4th grade teacher? Because that random shot in the dark just felt...
I think that if you liked top 10, check out Transmetropolitan. It's got a lot of the weird kookiness. I mean, it's a much different kind of story, but a lot of the world building stuff, the outrageousness of the world is
Yeah, absolutely
similar to me. And I always think of that book when I read this, and I always, well, not always, but sometimes think of this book when I read that book.
Cool. Brant, did you have one that you want to recommend?
Yeah, I think if folks like the idea of like a super powered world where everyone's got powers and it's kind of, the questions of what do you do with that and how you handle it, another good read would be Kurt Busiek's Astro City, which also grapples with some similar concepts. A little more straight up superhero-ish, little less cop procedure.
And I'll throw out the opposite. Gotham Central. Super police procedural set in Gotham City, dealing with Gotham City super crooks like Mr. Freeze.
Like Gotham, the series.
Yeah. Oh, wait.
Which is so great. It's so good.
Hey,
we all acknowledge this. It's so good.
I actually have not watched a single episode of Gotham.
Season 1's not too bad. Season 2's going off the rails.
Selena
pretty
Kyle is
hardcore.
adorable. Everything else can die.
All
Selena
right,
Kyle is perfect.
Kit, would you like to recommend a book?
Want more grump? Read Light of Thy Countenance, because it's about an old man being afraid of the fucking television at the end.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Kayleigh?
I actually was kind of surprised nobody did this because I was worried that it would be stolen from me. But Rocket Girl, police woman in unusual circumstances, where she is a child in the future.
Part of the
and
New
also
York
a cop.
City Teen Police.
Yes.
I love that book.
And
Yeah,
it's
it's
super
great.
good, and the art is fantastic. And fuck if we know when the next issue is coming
Hey,
out, or if.
Four Eyes Volume 2 just is getting ready to push its first issue, so that means
Actually,
you never give up hope.
As we record today, it dropped today.
Hey, so
Yeah.
And Rocket Girl had an issue last week or 2 weeks ago.
No, it did.
Yeah, it did.
Kayleigh, do you work at a comic book shop?
I swear I just read a new issue of Rocket Girl.
I don't know because
The sound of 3 people pulling out their phones.
Yeah.
to look it up.
Anyway, before we wrapped up, something that I thought would be fun to do for the future, because we're going to do one of these episodes each month, is reserve a little bit of time for some comment responses. And so I kind of threw out a quick, hey, anybody got a quick comment before we recorded? And I did get one back from Tony Asaro, who wanted to say, Views continues to be one of the best and most look forward to things that I put in my ears. And the addition of Kit has been a massive come up for us because she is fantastic. His words, not mine.
Answer's the best.
and he wanted to share a piece of constructive criticism. We tried an experiment a few episodes ago with censoring the cursing so that we could put it out as not explicit. And I'm going to say this is completely on me. Did not work out. This is something that I had been lobbying for a really long time. And, it fucked with the flow too much. So
you were a bastard, Toby. That was dumb as fuck.
Yeah.
Fucking
you asshole.
Shit.
I am just a prick of truly preposterous proportions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, not something that we're going to be doing again. But thank you everybody who sounded off telling me what a dumb shit I am.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome.
Motherfucker.
So, Rocket Girl issue 7 dropped beginning of December after being on a 7-month hiatus.
Okay, so it was in the last month, but not in the last couple weeks.
No.
Okay, then I caught up with it late.
Okay. Point is, yay, we've got a comic.
But there are new issues coming out.
Yes.
And the creators, Amy Reeder and Brandon Montclair, are also doing Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur for Marvel.
Yes, which honestly probably means Rocket Girl will go back on hiatus.
Boo.
If they're busy.
Maybe not.
I don't think there was a Rocket Girl this week, and this would have been its monthly release.
So the question is, are they going to pull a Matt Fraction or a Judd Winnick?
Yeah.
What the fuck is the point of science if we're not cloning people to make art
I don't know.
and quicker? Fucking pick that shit up, big
fucking
science.
overworking poor Stapon Sage, and fucking why don't we just clone him?
Yeah,
save him the trouble.
Because then his art would
new
be
Patreon
unique.
Tier.
Yeah. You give us millions of dollars, we will promise to prioritize it towards genetic research to cloning Stapons.
Yeah, think about it.
Or just buy a copy of Death Vigil, because that book was amazing.
It was amazing. You can pick up as many copies as you like at my work, because currently it is 4 individuals' top pick.
Nice.
Yes.
Hey.
Gabby had to veto some of them so that we didn't just have racks upon racks of people going, hey, have you read Death Vigil? Because it's good. And she's like, no, stop this. This is silly.
All right. Well, unless there was anything else, I think that will do it for us for this week. Next week, we will be reading the book that we voted for last week, which is ODY-C by Matt Fraction, and I don't remember the artist's name. His name is Christian Ward.
Some jerk.
I'll go ahead and edit it in post.
Fuck it, we'll fix it in post.
Please do it with a really bad robotic voice.
Yeah.
ODY-C by Fraction and artist name.
Jesus Christ.
You got it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Here's to another 150 episodes.
Yeah.
And we will see you all next week. Bye, everybody. This has been a production of View from the Gutters. We hope you'll join us next time for discussion of our selected title. In the meantime, we encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr. Become a sponsor of the show at patreon.com/viewfromthegutters, or leave us a review on iTunes, as it does help new listeners find the show. We encourage you to send any questions, comments, or recommendations you may have to contact@viewfromthegutters.com. Thank you for listening, and as always, keep reading.
You're not allowed to say that. You haven't even been here for
no,
that
I'm
many.
just saying God, because God, who would want to do that with their time? Bunch of nerds.
Yeah.
If you had asked me 3 years ago when I started on episode 10 if I'd still be here 140 episodes later, I would have been like, nah. Like, I don't think that we could have gone that long.
Are they threatening you, Cade?
Are you?
Is that what you mean?
Are you here?
Okay.
On your free will?
All right. Good night.